What makes a great Superman? That is exactly what we are going to be talking about in today's video, along with one of the silliest fan campaigns I've ever seen. I just want to start off by apologizing that I can't use any footage from any Superman movie or TV show. WB will claim any video I use their footage in despite the fact that it falls under fair use, so we're gonna have to make do with still frames and some unrelated gameplay footage in the background. When it comes to Superman, everybody has this perfect idea of what the character should look and act like. And with David Corenswet being the latest to step into the boots, he has received his own set of criticism and praise. And the same could be said for the writer-director of the movie, James Gunn. Now, James Gunn, I've been saying for the longest time, is somebody who really understands the comic book source material and knows what it means to make a great comic book movie or TV show. He has a great understanding of what to keep and what to change, which is extremely evident in his Guardians of the Galaxy trilogy, The Suicide Squad, Season 1 of Peacemaker, and Creature Commandos. Now, each of those projects are kind of similar in tone and personality. A group of sarcastic, misfit characters that all come together, crack jokes, and are at constant odds with one another, which is kind of what Gunn has become known for. But it seems like as soon as the decision was announced for him to fully reboot the DC Extended Universe into his own DC universe, some people were really on board for it, while others were firmly against it. We do have to acknowledge the fact that a lot of that vocal criticism comes from fans of Zack Snyder's Justice League, who were very disappointed to see that the DC Extended Universe would be ending following the promise of more Henry Cavill Superman. I'm not saying they are the only critics, but they are the loudest group, creating things like campaigns to review bomb the movie and to ensure people know not to go see James Gunn's Superman. And they have mostly been spearheading the idea that James Gunn doesn't understand Superman. He's writing Superman to just act like Star-Lord. Why would Superman ever lose his cool in front of Lois Lane like that? That's not how Superman is supposed to act. But I'll raise you this question. How is Superman supposed to act? When Zack Snyder's Man of Steel came out, a lot of people were put off by the fact that he had to kill General Zod. It was a divisive decision because Superman isn't known for killing many characters. If we're talking about in the mainline DC universe, he has done so, but it's always a last resort. While I'm not a big fan of Man of Steel, when it came out, I didn't mind this decision. It was Superman's first day on the job, and he was forced to make an impossible choice between killing Zod or saving a family. Whether or not there was the possibility of saving Zod, I attribute to his inexperience as a hero. And with this being Superman's origin story, I always thought of this moment as kind of setting the morality for how Superman will develop as a hero. Now, this didn't live up to what I thought they were going to do given the release of Batman v Superman, but I like the idea that a mistake he makes on day one could mold him into being a much more hopeful and idealistic Superman. What I didn't like about how this version of Superman developed was the fact that he didn't evolve beyond the somber personality he had in Man of Steel. We kinda see a lot of the same issues in Superman Returns. Both of them focus on the idea of Superman being an outsider. Krypton is lost and he's the last of his kind. Despite that though, he is supposed to still be idealistic. He's supposed to have a strong protective attachment to Earth and its people. Something a lot of defenders of Zack Snyder's adaptation of Superman misinterpret as a criticism that he's not smiling enough or he isn't happy enough as Superman is supposed to be. There's a balance to this character that writers like Grant Morrison really understand. I frequently cite All-Star Superman as the gold standard story for how Superman acts. This is the character at a point in his life where he should be lacking all hope. James Gunn recently said in an interview that what he thinks is interesting about Superman is his vulnerabilities. While the public perception is that Superman is this unbeatable, indestructible force for good, at the center of his character is an emotional, vulnerable human being. And this is how I kind of always viewed Superman also. My first real exposure to the character was in Smallville, and while that show does have its various highs and lows, the characterization of Clark Kent has always been something I really appreciated about that show. In the beginning of the show, he begins begins making increasingly selfish and impulsive decisions, something that shapes him into a character that would eventually become Superman. It also plays at aspects of his isolation as a character, being so different from everybody else around him at such a critical time in anybody's life, and that series really had an understanding of those aspects of the character. Now, I find it more important to look at different modern interpretations of Superman rather than focusing on Elseworld iterations, because Superman, like any character in pop culture, has evolved and changed with each adaptation and iteration of the character. There is no true defining version of Superman. Even the earliest iteration of the comic version of Superman that Siegel and Schuster were writing is a completely different character from the version of Superman in the 60s, the Christopher Reeve version of Superman, the mullet-bearing Superman of the 90s, and so on. So what is the defining standard personality that Superman should have? Well, I think it boils down to three main traits: kindness, bravery, and a sense of justice. Those are the only things that are necessary to create a faithful adaptation of Superman. Now, I think there is the opportunity to create a very different version of him that you would feature in an Elseworld story, but if we're speaking traditionally, those three traits are the only necessary details. Everything else is up to the writer and performer. While I have my issues with Zack Snyder's interpretation of Superman, I can't say that he doesn't have those three qualities. So when we talk about whether or not James Gunn's interpretation of Superman is better or worse than Zack Snyder's version, those are the three things we should be looking at. We shouldn't be comparing the stoicism one version of the character has versus the sense of humor another version of the character has. Both of them are elements of Superman, but they are all rooted in those three fundamental traits. They are all that matters when determining whether or not a characterization of Superman succeeds or fails. I think that's gonna wrap up this topic though. Let's end this video with a mailbag question. If you want a question to be answered in a future video, leave it down in the comments below with the hashtag mailbag. Today's question comes from Matt Says Hello. They ask, what's your favorite cinema experience? Not necessarily your favorite film. Mine is The Meg. I watched it on holiday in New York in a 4DX screen. A full cinema, shaking chairs, and being splashed with water. It was wild. Thank you so much for your question, and I go to the movies a lot, so this is a pretty big question for me. I've seen movies in pretty much any format that's currently available. I don't really care for seeing movies in 3D. I don't think it's the worst experience, and I think it works for movies that are specifically built around the technology like Avatar, but most of the time I find it a little unnecessary. I have seen a couple movies in 4DX and some in RDX, and I think they're fun and enjoyable enough, but they're not my ideal way to watch a movie. I think I can definitively say the worst way to watch a movie is seeing it in ScreenX, which if you've never had the displeasure of seeing anything in ScreenX, I went to see Ghostbusters Afterlife in this format just to test it out, and there are certain parts of the movies that they expand out to project onto the walls, and if you think that wouldn't look very good, you're right. It was very clear that the movie wasn't designed to be seen that way, and there were certain moments such as when all four of the original Ghostbusters were seen on screen together for the first time, where two of them would be cut off by the stretching screen. You could even see the exit sign lighting up through the projection. But my ideal way to watch a movie is a pretty obvious answer. I love seeing movies on IMAX screens. I just don't think anything looks quite as good as a movie in IMAX, and there's nothing else quite like going to see a movie you really enjoy in a movie theater. But thank you so much for that question. Again, if you want to leave your own mailbag question, drop it in the comments below with the hashtag mailbag. That's gonna do it for today's video though. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.